Welcome, everybody, to episode 88
Welcome
of
to
the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris.
Organizations
I hope that everybody out there is having an awesome week so far. I know that I am.
Your host, Jeremy
If
Paris.
the week hasn't been as good for you as you would have liked it to be, then maybe you should reach out to some of these organizations that I'm talking to on a regular basis here. Reach out to them and get plugged in. That could totally change your outlook for the whole week. And speaking of which, today we've got an organization called Red Kite Rising, which is part of the Red Kite Project. Now I'm going to be talking to Charlotte and Sam. It's a really good interview. I know that you're going to like it. Let me give you a little bit of background on them right now. Charlotte DiBartolomeo is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Red Kite Project. She earned a master's in conflict transformation with a specialty in intercultural service, leadership, and management from the School of International Training Graduate Institute in Vermont. She has studied post-war development in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and has served as an NGO delegate to the United Nations at the 2003 Economics Conference for Women. Charlotte has been a trainer and facilitator for 20 years, working in corporate, government, and academic sectors. She has done conflict coaching with managers, developed and instructs curricula for workforce development and transformational leadership, and facilitates dialogue processes within both the public and private sectors. Sam Stone is the director of Red Kite Rising, the martial arts healing division dedicated to helping youth and adults resolve traumatic effects of PTSD and developmental trauma. He has written curriculum and instructs programs in the Philadelphia School District and Jane Addams Place, a transitional housing facility in West Philadelphia for women and children. All right, let's jump right into the interview. Charlotte, Sam, welcome to the Veteran Resource Podcast. How you doing today?
We're doing well, thank you. How are you?
Doing outstanding. So,
Terrific.
I just wanted to start off with a brief description. We're going to be talking today about the Red Kite Project and also Red Kite Rising. So could you just give me a brief description of what the Red Kite Project is?
Certainly. Red Kite Project is a human resiliency organization that works in high-pressure industries to help professionals mitigate the impact of burnout and traumatic stress that often leads to absenteeism and high turnover rates and conflicts and assaults and many safety issues. So we work in industries like the medical field and in transit and anybody who's a first responder, police officers, EMTs, and of course in the military and folks who are veterans.
Excellent. And you also have Red Kite Rising. So can you tell me just a brief description of what that is?
Absolutely. Red Kite Rising started as an approach to healing trauma from a somatic and physical standpoint. It focuses on helping people alleviate the symptoms of PTSD and even just stress using martial arts, breathing, meditation, and a circle process, an approach that sort of looks at the entire person and their healing process.
I can't wait to get into a little bit more about that too. Very curious about that. Before we do, though, I want to get to know a little bit about both of you. So let's start with Charlotte. Can you give me a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. I started in the field of crisis and intervention. Oh my gosh, it's been 20 some years now. I started working with children and youth and youth who are coming in and going out of the juvenile justice system. I worked with gangs, members of gangs, and mediated that sometimes. Also did leadership groups, and I worked with children and youth who were suffering from trauma and were living in the margins of our society, and who were experiencing drug and alcohol issues, whose families were experiencing that, and people who had had a lot of loss. And so it became really profound work for me that I wanted to get more deeply involved with. And I went back to school for it. And so I got a master's in conflict transformation. I didn't do the typical thing, which was become a therapist. I decided that I thought it was more important to take a look at what's happening in our whole community. And so I was really fortunate that I was able to go to a school called the School for International Training in Vermont, and they sent me to Bosnia.
Hmm.
And while I was in Bosnia, this was back in 2003, 2004, I was able to witness the community there that was dealing with genocide and the effects of that and the effects of war and just a total breakdown of community. And so while witnessing what they were doing to heal and to rebuild, I started thinking about my own community here in the States. And when I came back to Philadelphia, which is my hometown, I noticed that we are not, certainly we're not at war here, but we have certain aspects of our community that feels like it's war. There are certain neighborhoods in our town and many towns across the country where it feels like you're in a war zone. And in fact, I remember a friend came from the Middle East, and he went through North Philly with me one day, and he said, "God, this really looks worse than my own neighborhood."
Hmm.
And I was, really struck by that. And so I thought, it's really important to bring some of the tools that I learned in Bosnia and what's happening in the international community to rebuild more sustainable communities. And so I brought those back and started Red Kite Project with that in mind.
Well, that's great. That's great. Taking the experiences you had overseas and bringing them back here, helping the local
Yeah.
communities. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Thank you.
and Sam, how about your background?
I think you just hit the nail on the head by saying your experiences, because I got into this ultimately through Jefferson. I was an EMT for a very short time, and what I noticed is that I was numbing out very quickly due to the things that I was seeing and that I was witnessing, and just having to help people, and sometimes realizing that some people don't want to be helped, and there are reasons for that, but they also experience a lot of things, and you pick that up too. And so I realized when I was numbing out, I had to do something. So I started really focusing on martial arts, and I realized this is exceptional. It's very helpful. And while I did get out of the field as a first responder, it carried with me. And when I became a facilitator years later, it was invaluable. And my brother actually was a result of the Red Kite Rising whole thing starting up. And through him, I was able to enter into the shelters and then start working with veterans. And that was a very powerful experience that sort of developed the whole Red Kite Rising program.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And I was going through your website and looking at a couple different things about Red Kite Project and about Red Kite Rising. One of the things that I saw was Red Kite Project War Zone Training for the Workplace. And I thought that was super interesting, but I didn't fully understand in what cases this would be used. Can you kind of go over a little bit about what that is and what use cases there would be for it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we see ourselves as the backup to the backup. And, the backup is our military, it's our EMTs, it's the helpers in the world, the people who have done Herculean things to keep our societies in a place of, functioning.
They keep our world moving.
And a place for peace. And so we wanted to do some of the things that are happening across the world where people are trying to de-escalate conflicts and are also rebuilding community. And that's what so much of our programming is about. It's about certainly learning the best skills to de-escalate, to intervene in crisis. But it's also a way for people to create some awareness of their own triggers and how they interact in a situation. And we use a really integrated approach. First of all, we recognize that our participants that we work with are they're the ones who are the most experienced in their field. They are the people who understand what they do better than anybody else. So we don't try to talk down at people, and we don't say, you have to listen to us. We bring out their best practices, and they share with each other. And in the process of that, they're helping to rebuild their own work communities. And when it comes to working with veterans, we know that of reentry and working or just spending time in community can sometimes be a rocky road.
It's a lot of, I mean, as you know, it's a lot about identity and the shifting identities that come with reintegration. And so by rebuilding community, we can sort of rebuild that identity of someone who is not just in the mindset of still at war, but to come back to something and rebuild a very happy, healthy experience.
Right, right. That's great. And what would be some actionable tips maybe that some of the listeners you could kind of relay to them right now, that if they were to go through this training?
Actionable tips. Well, first of all, our trainings go from starting at 1 day to 5 days. And I would say actionable tips are about listening to one another, finding ways to. He's nodding. He's like, that's exactly what I would say. It's about listening, and when it comes to communicating with each other on whatever level it is, whether it be with a boss or a coworker, or with the most intimate relationships, your spouse, finding ways to listen in a deeper way is very helpful. And so we teach that. We talk about listening as a way of witnessing for the other person. So we do a lot of things around conflict transformation. How do you transform conflicts? Not just resolve it, but transform them. And that's about finding common ground. So always looking for common ground. But when we're doing the skill building piece, after we create some awareness, we also teach people some language around that. Things like, I get what you're saying, I hear what you're saying, so that people can feel like they're being acknowledged.
Because acknowledgement is key. Because as much as people want to be heard, ultimately, right, that's really what it comes down to. A lot of fights occur and we get louder and we start screaming at each other because we want people to hear us. And when somebody else doesn't hear us and they're sort of ignoring you, the first thing you do is you get louder. So a lot of what we do is we build peace through trying to find ways to get people to A, listen, and then B, acknowledge what the other person is saying. Through that, you can really shut down a lot of arguments and problems before they begin.
Yes, that's excellent. I spent 16 years in the defense contracting world after getting out of the military. And believe me when I tell you that I've seen this used correctly and incorrectly on a regular basis, almost every single day at work.
Yeah, people will sometimes use it against other people because they don't quite get the skill. But sometimes they just do it to put their power over somebody else.
Right.
I think finding common ground is an important thing, and using we statements a lot. We know that when we're in the midst of a conflict with somebody, you see them on the other side of the conflict. You don't see that person as somebody who's trying to solve a problem with you. And when you can shift that up a bit and see that you're on the same team, or at least try to think of it that way, and you're both looking at the problem that's over on the outside, then you become a united front to fix it.
And being able to shift your language up to say we and unite is really critical to that, because human beings, when left to our own devices, we are built to defend ourselves, and we're built to put ourselves in positions where we go, okay, you're the enemy. Right. It's a lot of enemy. And we're built to do that because that's how we win fights.
And that's how we survive. It's a lot of it's about the survival, the threat response. That becomes really exaggerated, especially when you're in a high pressure situation for weeks or months or years at a time.
And it just builds and builds and builds, and then you blow up on one of your coworkers and you yell at them. It's a very simple thing that occurs as a result of our natural wiring. And it's not something to be ashamed of or worry about, but by using the language and paying attention to what's going on inside your own body, you can avoid that.
But wouldn't you agree, Sam, it's also about having some recognition about what's happening in your own body? And
Absolutely.
that's where Red Kite Rising has come in, because we've done a lot of work around how you rewire that neurobiology, that exaggerated threat response that occurs when somebody has been in a traumatic situation, or has been even just in a situation where they've been burned out, and they're now at a place where every little thing is a trigger for them. So we want to help people to rewire their neurobiology, the physical piece to that bottom up stuff that happens.
Especially because it separates you when you go through something like that. And if you can get people to rewire that response, then you can get them to reconnect with the community. And that's kind of what, again, Red Kite is all about, reconnecting and re-empowering.
Very nice. And let's switch gears here a little bit and go to Red Kite Rising. I have a feeling that this is going to fit neatly into the overall picture. Kind of give me the origin story. How did that come about, using martial arts for healing?
Well, I'll tell you, Zach, who is another partner in the organization, he was at it was kind of crazy because he had gone to this shelter. I was with him, actually. He'd gone to this shelter to do some work for the Homeless Health Initiative, and he was filming kids there, and they were being asked to play soccer. They had no interest in soccer at all. These were kids who were living in the city of Philadelphia, didn't want to do soccer, but they're doing soccer. And there was this one kid who he had cigarette burns all over his legs. So this was a shelter that was a domestic violence shelter for people who had experienced domestic violence, women and their children. And so this kid was about 13 years old. He had these cigarette burns all over him, all over the bottom part of his body. And he was just sitting on the sidelines. And Zach said to him, "So, okay, I get it. You don't want to do this. What would you like to do?" He's like, "What would I like to do? I'd like to do martial arts." And so Zach told Sam that, and Sam ran with it. So you can say the rest about that.
You know, here was a kid who was choosing his own intervention. That's an incredibly powerful thing to start with. The best intervention is the one that someone is willing to do. It's something that I've always felt. And so if you can meet someone where they're at, that's incredible. And I had that skill, martial arts, and I'd grown up around the idea of trauma, and I had faced my own sort of experiences and my own numbing through when I was an EMT. And coming through that experience and realizing, well, how did I come back from that? Okay, here's a kid who's picking martial arts. I picked martial arts. This is a match made in heaven. So I sat there and I went, how can I build this in a way that doesn't re-traumatize people? Because martial arts has a tendency to be done in a way that can make things worse, especially because you're dealing with the threat response constantly. You are quite literally rebuilding the threat, how you deal with a threat every single time you practice martial arts and you learn new moves. So with that in mind, I set about looking at the threat response and why we get traumatized. And what we know about trauma is that it sits in the body. It's not just a mental illness like it was once believed, but it's a physical injury to the body. Trauma, it results when we experience a fight, flight, freeze scenario, and we experience a negative outcome that overwhelms us. We don't experience a positive one. We don't get through it. You don't get to say, "Oh, you should see the other guy," or "Oh, I fought back." You simply fold or freeze. And that's when trauma occurs. So, and it does so as a way to keep us safe. And that's not always an easy thing to look at. So what I ended up doing was I created a non-hitting martial art that essentially used defensive postures to rebuild the response to aggression and the adrenal cycle so that people could start to rewrite the adrenal cycle and the fight, flight, freeze scenario that they were constantly experiencing and have positive outcomes rather than a negative one. So gently guiding people into learning these moves and then employing them successfully, I was able to get a lot of these kids, when we started this program, to move through whatever it was that they were experiencing. And for a short time, we didn't even know if it was working. But then about 16 weeks in, I think, the head of the shelter spoke to me and he said, it's really amazing because I had been dealing with these kids and they've been all, off the wall, having a great time every time they're in class. But he told me that the fighting amongst the participants in the shelter had stopped entirely.
Wow.
Yes, it was one of the most violent shelters, at least for where youth was concerned, in Philadelphia up until that point. And so, wow, okay, we're not just running a babysitting class with martial arts.
Wow.
This is actually some real effect.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And then from there, they started working the program at this place called the Perimeter, which is a day shelter for men and women, female and male veterans across the just Philadelphia and the surrounding areas. And they had some pretty awesome success with that as well.
We did.
And so this is healing or helping with PTSD specifically for the veterans in this scenario using martial arts?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, martial arts and also circle process, which is a nice terminology for sitting around together and rebuilding community and sharing some things with each other, and also learning some things about conflict resolution,
And really what the focus was helping people, especially veterans, to re-empower and shift their identity, because what we know about reintegration and experiencing trauma and wounds is that the wounded warrior is a very real thing, and it's something that is promoted through the system that we have here in the States for reintegration. So you are encouraged to engage with your wounds and hold on to them rather than heal, because that's how you get subsidies. That's how you rebuild, and so people are afraid to lose that. And so when you're dealing with a population that has to hold on to their trauma, that becomes the new identity. They lose the identity of soldier and become the wounded warrior. And by helping people to regain the re-empowerment piece to go from wounded warrior to I can still fight, that's a very big deal. And it's something that was incredibly helpful to a large group of people that we worked with at the perimeter. I had one man who was a former Navy boxer, and he walked with a cane every day for 30 years. And after a week in the class, he stopped using the cane.
Wow.
Because it wasn't about his actual injuries. It was just about his identity of being wounded.
That's pretty incredible. And so you mentioned that this is a martial art that is using defensive postures. Is this based off of Aikido?
Surprisingly, no. When we first started, there was a little bit of Aikido involved with it, but I ended up bringing it back and making it even more simple. Trauma can often make it harder to perform very intricate motions, and I didn't want this to be frustrating for people. So what I did was I looked at the fear response, the don't hurt me, that everyone does when something is thrown at their face, they block their face. We have it in us already to defend ourselves. We are built to do so. We are wired to do so. And you can see in a lot of different martial arts, from karate to tai chi, there are certain movements that look similar to one another, even if they play out differently. Those postures are what I looked at and I brought back, and I really just looked at the flinch response and looked at the similarities and tried to find something that I could really build in that everyone already could do to a certain degree.
Very cool. So does this martial art have a name?
I've just
Red Kite Rising.
Red Kite Rising, because I don't think of it as a complete martial art. I think of it as a series of postures. It's by no means complete in terms of learning to defend yourself or be a fighter. But what it does is it helps you with the specific exercises that we do to re-engage the threat response. We do something called escape, where you have to go from one side of the room to the other. And there's an obstacle, usually one of the instructors, and you have to get past them as they try to keep you there, either grabbing you or holding you in place. And using these postures that I sort of brought back in, because they certainly have already existed for millennia. They use those postures to learn how to activate and use their power appropriately and get the instructor out of the way. So it's just about getting from point A to point B, and this is the simplest, easiest way to do it.
Excellent. Yourself, have you seen their confidence coming back like in a very short time from where they before they started to once they started using this?
Absolutely. It's just about feeling like they can use their body again. I mean, and that's such a key piece to trauma, is feeling like an outsider in your own body. And if you can start to feel as if it is your instrument, your way to interact with the world again, it's a whole different ballgame.
Oh, that's great. What areas do you guys cover geographically? You said that you're in Philadelphia. Are you just in that area?
No, when it comes to Red Kite Project, and we do some of these. Well, I shouldn't say that necessarily the martial arts stuff, except that we do use the breathing techniques and all of that. We're all over the country. We're on the East Coast, up and down the Eastern Seaboard. We've worked in Minneapolis, so we have interest from a lot of different areas. And of course, we try to go where people ask us to go.
Oh, that's great. So if there's a martial arts organization, is that who you normally connect with? If like a different organization says this is something we want to incorporate, do they come to you to, I guess, learn your techniques?
Not at the moment, but that might be a next step for us.
Mm-hmm. The nice thing about these techniques is that they are easily taught to either martial artists or even just a social worker. They're natural human responses, so anyone can learn to do this, and anyone can learn to teach.
Hey, I'm a social worker.
Yeah.
A justice.
That's it's if you have no experience with martial arts, you could quickly learn this to build on and create a skill that you can use to help people. It's a very simple thing.
I think that's a really good part about it too, because it really allows people to, no matter where they're at in terms of their health and wellness with their bodies.
It's that meeting people where they're at.
Yeah, it's about meeting people where they're at, and recognizing that they can re-empower themselves. Maybe they're not going to be what they were when they were 16, but they can definitely re-empower themselves and start to train their bodies to get back to a place where they feel like they're in charge again.
And the nice thing about that is anytime you're in a class like that, you are reconnecting with either a new community or a community that you've been a part of for a long time.
Wow, that's great. There's so many different veteran organizations that are out there around the country right now who could probably benefit from teaming up with you to be able to provide this to their members.
Well, we would love to hear from anyone, even if it's just a matter of a phone call or sharing what we know and talking more about trauma and how that impacts people, and sharing education. We're certainly open to that.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. I know that there's probably a bunch of organizations who are listening to this episode right now. So for any of them that want to reach out to you to talk specifically about collaborating, is there somebody within your organization that they should specifically talk to?
I mean, either Sam or myself would be great.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't assist, we would probably send them to someone else, maybe Zach, who is also Carmen. There are a number of folks in the organization, but certainly give me a call. Mm-hmm. And we also are going to be, in about a month, we're going to be hosting a webinar for professionals who've had extremely stressful jobs, just so we can educate them on how to heal from professional trauma exposure. And that's going to be on our website to find out the particulars to that.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And I'll make sure that in the show notes, I put the links to everything, the website, and even the webinar. If you have that available, I could put that in the show notes to make it nice and easy for the listeners to get to.
Terrific. That would be great.
Absolutely.
That would be wonderful. Trauma has really impacted a lot of people's lives, and we know that people can heal from it. It's, they call PTSD that it's a disorder, but it's something that can be healed. It's an injury.
It's also something that's useful and that you can grow from in the right situation, because it is a response to how to keep us safe. It's just a matter of mitigating that and learning how to use that.
Oh, good way to look at it. And speaking of your website, I also noticed that you've got a pretty lively blog on there with a lot of great articles.
We try to keep it updated.
Yeah, good stuff there. I would say for any of the listeners, go and check out the website and read some of those articles on the blog.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Appreciate that.
So I think that we covered everything that we need to. Is there anything that I might have missed before we get into the final three?
No, I think we're pretty good.
Yeah, I think we're on point.
All right, excellent. All right, so the final three questions here. We'll start with number 1. Who would you like to hear on a future episode of the Veteran Resource Podcast?
We recently connected with a foundation called the Stephen Cohen Foundation. There's a site here in Philadelphia, but I think that there are folks across the country who are part of that foundation, and they're doing some pretty awesome work.
Amazing work.
With veterans and their families. And it's a way to, if you're having some issues with, dealing with the services that are already provided through the VA, sometimes this is another way to go. So it's a complimentary service. So I think that is a wonderful place to start.
And they have a really great approach to the way they do things, and I think that would be fantastic for the show.
Excellent. I will definitely be looking into that and reaching out to the Stephen Cohen Foundation.
Perfect.
Question number 2, what upcoming project has you fired up right now?
Well, we're pretty excited about the webinar.
Yeah.
That's, we always appreciate the opportunity to educate people about trauma because it feels like such a big thing, and to help people recognize that there are ways to heal this injury, and that there's hope out there, and that you can re-empower yourself and you can make shifts. That's exciting to us, to be able to share that information as much as possible.
Very much so.
Excellent. And I'll try to get some information in the show notes as well. But like Charlotte said, you could just go to the website and get all of the information about the webinar and get signed up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. And the final question, the brain stretcher. If you woke up tomorrow and you found out that somebody made an anonymous donation of $10 million to your organization, what would you do with it?
Well, we've had this vision of a center, a physical space for people to come and re-empower themselves and shift their identity and reconnect with community and find ways to rewire their neurobiology that's been holding their bodies hostage for some time. So an integrative approach to trauma healing, that is something that we're working towards. And we know that once we get that off the ground, we'll be able to multiply that. It's a new model of healing, and we're pretty excited about it. So yeah, the 10 million would really help for that.
You go a long way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's great. You guys already have something all planned out for it, ready to go. So for that person out there who's got $10 million or maybe a little bit less, and you want to donate that, where is the best place for them to get in contact with you?
Probably through our website. I think that would be the best thing. And Zach Stone, who is our Chief Strategy Officer, would probably be very helpful for that.
Okay, and I will put that in the show notes, but also, just so that you have it here, redkiteproject.com is the URL.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's the one.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I found out a lot about the Red Kite Project, and I know that there's listeners who are hearing about the organization for the first time as well. So I'm really glad that you were able to come on the show.
Well, thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for having
and
us.
Thank you for doing the work that you're doing. It's really important, and we all need to stay connected with each other. So I appreciate you facilitating that.
Absolutely. And I will make sure I stay connected with you guys.
Please do.
We'd love that. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As always, make sure you check out the show notes. Go to veteranresourcepodcast.com/088, and you're going to be able to get all of the information on Red Kite Project, Red Kite Rising, and you'll see the backgrounds for Charlotte and for Sam, and you'll have links there where you can get plugged in, go over to their website, check them out a little bit more, and also there'll be some information on the website coming up for the webinar that they have. And before I go, I also wanted to say that we have a truckload of reviews that are all 5-star, thank you very much, in iTunes. But I would love to see some more in there. We're not at the top of the rankings or anything like that in iTunes. So when people are searching for us, they jump into iTunes and we're not there in their face. They end up grabbing something else, and we would love for them to listen to this podcast and get the benefit from it that you're getting. So please go to veteranresourcepodcast.com/iTunes. That's going to redirect you over to iTunes, where you can rate and review the podcast. and I would love to see some more 5-star ratings in there. That's all I got for you today. I'll see you tomorrow for episode 89.